In the last few years, we've seen a huge and well-documented exodus from high-tax, high-regulation states like California to places like Texas and Florida and even places like Tennessee. But the reality is this has been going on for a long time. People have been leaving the New Jerseys and the Marylands and all the high-tax states for greener pastures. But yet, I've recommended against doing that. And today I'm going to give you 5 reasons why. Our 5 magic words here at Nomad Capitalist are go where you're treated best. And the most important word there is best. What I've said for years is if you're going to move, you might as well move. People packing up and moving from California to Florida and saying, hey, I'm going to save some taxes, I'm going to have some more personal freedom. Is that the most you can save on taxes? Is that the most personal freedom? And you're already pretty far away from family that people use to justify that decision of why they want to stay in the United States versus moving overseas. My question is, why don't you give yourself the best? Now, if it's your first time here, my name is Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consultancy that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce their taxes, diversify their assets, get second passports, increase their freedom. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. We also host the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live, which is open to everybody. You can learn some of our strategies and what is working. Now, I'm going to share with you a comment about someone who says why they think I'm wrong and you should stay in your country. By the way, if you're a Canadian and you're talking about moving to Calgary to get away from those crazy people in Ontario, if you're living in France and you think moving to Belgium is the answer, this can somewhat apply to you. I come from the United States and I see so many people saying, I'm moving to Miami, I'm moving to Nashville, I'm moving to Austin. I'm going to tell you why I think it doesn't make the most sense. But someone says that I missed the point on why people move to Florida or Texas rather than go overseas, saying that I put them down as if they have some kind of psychological limitations. No doubt there is an idea. There's a wall in many of our minds. And by the way, I know because many years ago, before I became the Nomad Capitalist, or even before I started researching this stuff and traveling, I would look at the offshore bank account that paid higher interest. Like, oh no, that's scary. That's really scary. If I felt that way now, I would have left a lot of money on the table, but I have been there. So I know how to say it's a psychological limitation because I have been there. And I see how people think that moving from San Francisco to Miami and arguing, I'm closer to family while being in the United States is silly when you could move to somewhere in Mexico and be closer. Not saying Mexico is the only place to go. But he says the truth, the commenter, the truth that a lot of people who, like me, have lived in the more desirable European countries. I love these people, by the way. It's always like, I've done everything the best, and I still came back, and that's why he's wrong. They have to really prop themselves up. The truth is, people like me who've lived in the most desirable countries, who've dined on the caviar and had the fine wines, and everyone was at our beck and call. I'm just making it up. Such as England, France, Spain, and Ireland. I love Ireland. I'm not sure who thinks France is desirable anymore, but okay. Have a lot of reasons why we would much prefer to live in America. And for those people, they don't mind paying a little bit more and can afford to pay a little bit more to live in America. Now, the reality is, you are going to pay more to live in the U.S. because a lot of European countries now have tax incentives. Now, if you're an American, you can still legally reduce your taxes by going overseas. When you factor in some of the limitations on Americans that other countries don't have, and you factor in that European tax incentives are not just, Dubai level or Cayman Islands level or Vanuatu level, slash and burn to the ground, pay zero, you're going to pay something to live in Europe. So if you want to pay a little bit more, living in a place like Ireland, for example, is a place where you would pay a little bit more than you would going somewhere if you only cared about tax. And you know what? I think that's perfectly fine. Your tax rate doesn't have to be zero. But if you're going to live in the United States and you're going to pay as a 7- or 8-figure earner or as someone with a high net worth, you're going to pay between 40, 50%. I see people who are paying more than 50% here. If you're going to pay, let's just call it 45% or even 43%, which is I think where my peak was. If you're going to pay 43%, that's not a little bit more than 5 or 7 or 11. Let's just call it 10 or 11. That's like 4 times as much. That's not a little bit. I mean, a little bit more is like, all right, listen, here's a few extra bucks. That's a little bit more. And so you're paying a lot more than a little bit more. And that's when you're, by the way, already doing the I value my lifestyle more than slashing and burning my tax rate to the ground. This is especially true for those who have family in the States. Why would you move across the world when you can move across state lines? Hey, listen, if you have family in Georgia and you're going to move like right over the line to live in Florida, okay, cool. But people are moving from Los Angeles to Miami. That's not moving across state lines. That's a serious time zone change. That's a flight. That's in many cases a connecting flight if you're not flying private, right? Still be close to your family and live in the place that you love. So if you love the United States, that's cool. But what I'm hearing is a lot of folks saying our freedoms are being eroded. I'm tired of being a successful person and being attacked. I'm tired, I'm the evil guy in the country now because I created a business. There is a definite change. And so what I'm suggesting is make sure the country that you say you love isn't just because you have a blind love for something that once was. If you're no longer respected there, if you no longer feel comfortable, if you no longer feel safe, if the culture no longer matches your values, if you just don't feel like you belong anymore, that I understand it may have worked for you in 2010, but if it doesn't work today, then you should make a decision based on what works for you today. And if you want to be close to your family, maybe in many cases we have people who they take their whole family with them when they go somewhere else. As he's saying, plenty of places in Europe, for example, where you can reduce your taxes. Why not make it a family affair? And you know what? I understand. I've got a 92-year-old grandmother. It's hard for her to go really much of anywhere. But you know what? Some family and some friends, that's the other point people make, maybe you'll realize some of these folks really aren't that close to you when they won't make any effort to come and see you. Forget maybe moving with you. That's a pretty serious change. But would they even agree to split? Hey, I'll buy you a flight ticket. You come down to Panama. You hang out. You come over to Ireland. You hang out. Maybe some of these people, your commitment level to them is much higher than theirs ever would be to you. And maybe that's uncomfortable for some folks to realize. Right? When I left the United States, I have friends I've known for 15 years. We still just talked to one this morning. Right? There also were people who I realized our friendship was only based on proximity. We sit in the same room together, we talk. The minute I'm anywhere else, they're like, I can't comprehend this. Maybe that's not a friendship for someone who's a successful person who's growing in themselves. And so I would also argue, again, the family probably isn't as close as you think. And so he says, here's the best part. After all, there's a reason everyone around the world is still trying to get into America, which is absolutely and completely untrue. And many of the people who are looking to get in there are just looking to come and get a job. Some of them are just looking to get the passport and then go. So let's not flatter ourselves, especially Europeans. Yes, that long line of Norwegians who just can't wait to move to the U.S. So obviously I disagree with the commenter, but I wanted to go through on a practical level for you, the viewing audience, why I believe the idea of go where you're treated best is better than go where you're treated a little bit better. Because people talk about moving to, I guess Nevada is the other one in the U.S. You move to Las Vegas, you move to Reno, you're saving the state tax. And they're like, I'm tired of these high taxes. But you're still paying high federal taxes. You're still paying high taxes at the national level. So if it's just about saving a little bit of money, why change it all? Like if you said, hey, listen, Andrew, you should substantially change your life for a small amount of money. Nah, I'm good, thanks. I like to make bold moves for big amounts of money, for big improvements, for big happiness, for big anything. Why would you change your entire life? If you're moving, let's be clear, other than psychologically, you are going to go through pretty much all the same hassles, packing up your stuff and moving 3 hours away, or with a drive or a flight, than you are if you move 12 hours away. Maybe there's a ship instead of a moving van, but generally speaking, again, besides your idea of oh my goodness, what language they speak, or what restaurant am I going to go to? Is there a TGI Fridays in Uruguay? Like, other than that, it's really the same stuff. So number one reason is it's still a move. I would also argue, by the way, that in some cases, there are people who are moving from certain parts of California to certain parts of Texas or Florida, where the culture would be similar for them in somewhere in Latin America. Or there are people who are moving from high-tech states, let's say in the Northeast. Maybe the culture in the aforementioned Ireland, or in London, which could be tax-friendly for certain people, or in some part of Europe would be closer to them. I'll bet there are folks in Boston who would feel more comfortable being in Ireland than being in Miami. And they speak English in other countries as well. And so not every country, right? You can certainly go to many countries where there's pockets of English speakers, or where you're living in an expat community. You can go to pure play English-speaking countries. You can go to countries where you think they don't speak English, but they actually do speak English very widely as a second language. But a move is still a move. And I would argue that some folks who think that they're staying in the security of the United States, the culture is actually different. I mean, let's be honest. I grew up in Ohio. If I go down to the deep south, it's one of the parts of the U.S. I never really made it to, I'll bet that I, as someone from the Midwest, would get along better with, I don't know, pick someplace out in the world, than I would with someone who lives in Mississippi. Now, I don't hear people moving to Mississippi. By the way, I'm sure there are lovely people down there, but I'm saying within a huge country such as the United States there are definite divides. And so a move is a move, and you're probably not getting the same kind of similarities that everyone talks about that you think you are. Number two, you think you're saving taxes, but you're really not because the federal government still controls it. No doubt you have some states where it's pretty hard for them to implement some kind of state tax. But by the way, what do people say about Texas, for example? Not as applicable, in all fairness, if you are a 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur investor, but they make the money back in other ways. Certain states have higher sales tax, or in Texas they have higher property tax. And so people who move from California, for example, where they kind of limited in the amount of property taxes, you're not going to have that limitation in Texas. Now, perhaps the housing is cheaper in Texas, at least for now, but they're going to get their money one way or the other. And where I lived in Arizona, by the way, where I did pay, I felt, a relatively fair rate of state tax, to the extent that paying these people anything is fair. They just doubled the state tax basically for high earners in the last election cycle. So these things can change. Even if it's not the income tax per se, they can find more ways to take money from you. The third reason is people are often looking for a better culture, and no doubt being surrounded by more like-minded people is good. But I think still culture is largely a national thing. And so if you are looking for, what do people say? People want cultures that are more family values, that are less woke. People on the other side say, I want a culture where, people, have different political thoughts, and we have, some level of kind of discussion, right? There's this kind of brewing civil war going on in the U.S. Are you really going to entirely avoid that by, the media and everything that's just kind of at a national level? I don't care which side you're on. I think there's potentially a case to say there's a place in the world that is better for your personal values. And again, could you improve that being out of California and in Texas? Yeah, maybe. But I think you're not making the full improvement that you think you are. Number four, what's happening is people are moving from these states, and it's going to potentially make those states worse. And so what are you seeing? You're seeing Californians now moving up even to like Idaho. Prices in Idaho have been going nuts for some period of time. And so what does that mean for Idaho? Oh, we have personal freedom. We've got, I don't know that the taxes are that low in Idaho, but we've got, a certain way of life. Is that going to change? Well, no, because people say, why do people come from this state and then turn our state, which they say they like, into the state they just came from? And they're going to kind of bring these problems. You've got a state like Florida, which is already relatively purple, right? It's not necessarily super red or super blue. Well, what happens when all these people move in from high-tech states and they're like, you know what? Why don't we have this stuff in our high-tech state? That was actually the reason why the state became terrible. But let's vote for this stuff in this new state, right? And people, what is it like? Don't California my Texas. Well, they're going to California it right up for you. And then what's going to happen? Right? This has been talked about by people who are much more focused on this than I am in the U.S. media. And so what do you do then? Right? I think it's interesting when people are like, don't cut and run. These people, this Andrew, the Nomad Capitalist, he's cutting and running. Why doesn't he stay and fight? Why don't you stay and fight for California? Why don't you stay and fix it? Why are you cutting and running from California? Why are you out? Why aren't you trying to fix it? Why aren't you voting for the right politicians? Because the natural human instinct is to go where you're treated best. And people are going to do that. But then the other natural human instinct is people from different places have different values. That's why they lived in that place. That's why their family came from that place in the first instance. And then they're going to naturally bring that to the next place. And the fifth reason I would avoid this is you are going to see more overpriced assets right now in markets that historically are more cyclical. So again, where I'm from in Ohio, I think property prices really don't change that much versus where I lived in Arizona and where I briefly lived in California. You have a lot of these ups and downs. And so I bought a house and sold it for a great profit, and then the next guy sold it for a great profit, and it's just insane what prices are in some of these areas. And again, Phoenix, Arizona isn't exactly some super low tax mecca anymore. But look at prices. Miami, I think the most unaffordable property market right now in the United States. Property prices in Texas are going up. Now, these states have plenty of space and they have more open regulations, building codes, what have you, the way they can certainly build more housing if there is that demand. But you're going to see the affordability of these places go down. Now, you're certainly seeing that everywhere. You see people in Mexico complaining about all the Americans moving there and buying housing and kind of driving them out. You're seeing that in a lot of places in the world because it is a wide open competitive world. People are competing for talent. People are competing for wealth right now. They want those people to come to their country. And so you're going to see anywhere, Puerto Rico, you're going to see Portugal, so many places where prices are going to get driven up. Dubai, number one property market for high-profile property in 2021. Prices just went through the roof. But you can do that and you can save some money. Imagine if you make $1 million a year and you can save $300,000 in taxes by moving somewhere else. That's going to put a big dent in your purchasing a property. And you know what? I'll bank on some of these other markets where not every single property has a mortgage on it, having some level of sustainability in a future downturn, to where potentially if I own property in the US or Canada or somewhere like that, I'm taking my money off the table now. I'm going to go where I'm treated best. I'm going to dramatically reduce my taxes. I'm going to find a place that totally matches my values, not just kind of sort of does. And I'm going to push through that psychological barrier. Yes, I think it does exist because we've all been there. I've been there myself. And if I'm going to move, I'm going to actually move. And I'm going to pay attention to what are my top priorities. If it's time zones because I'm working with clients in a business, and I don't want to be working at 3 in the morning, well, then I'm not going to Asia if my clients are all in the US, because you're going to be working at 11 o'clock at night, 3 in the morning, what have you. So time zones. If I'm working in North American time zones, I've got the Americas, maybe Ireland or Portugal. You can make a case for that. It's not so far off. Okay, that's what's important to me. If it's proximity, then again, how easy is it to get back home? I again think that there are probably some easier flights, from Dublin, Ireland to Boston or some of the Northeast than there would be from some city in Texas, or at least just as easy potentially in terms of the travel time, right? And so these are the things that you want to prioritize. What's important for me, but let's not make moves to make a little bit better. People ask me, which state, if I can't move overseas? Well, that's the entire premise of what we talk about. It's leveraging what the world has to offer to escape the idea that we've been conditioned with, that your country is the best at not only anything, but everything. It's not. And so why don't you just find that place and then work to improve your ability to go there? There are schools, there are kids. If you can work remotely, if you can run your business remotely, even if you can't, you have to kind of go back and forth for a while until you can get it to that level. Go where you're treated best is the mantra, not go where you're treated a little bit better. That's why I chose not to move to Puerto Rico. That's why I chose not to move to Texas. I wanted to search for the best.